Makerfield, of course, was a great result for Andy Burnham and a completely terrible result for Reform. Nigel Farage, for his part, has been keeping away from TV cameras of late. I haven't seen him do a proper interview in ages. That seems largely because he doesn't want to answer any questions about millions of undeclared cash from a cryptocurrency billionaire. He doesn't think that's a good look, so he's just sort of, hiding. Well, not quite hiding, because he likes to do straight-to-camera videos from a sort of beautiful rolling hill. He released this video today on his Twitter.
Well, the Makerfield by-election was a dramatic, emphatic win for Andy Burnham, with a vote share that nobody could quite see coming. In many ways, he's a popular local mayor, just as Boris Johnson was a very popular mayor in London just a few years ago. But what really happened here is it was vote Burnham, get Starmer out, which of course was our campaign message leading up to the locals on the 7th of May. So we were slightly hoist with our own petard. As for the Reform vote share, well, I thought we'd get 18,000 votes. We got just shy of 16, so I'm disappointed by that, no question about it. But I would say this, there's a couple of thousand voters there who would normally have gone out and voted Reform that voted Restore. And I would say directly to them, what do you want? We are the challenger party to the left in this country, and I would urge you to think again. I really, really would. In Scotland, we were pleased to come second in Arbroath, but the Conservatives had a win in Aberdeen South. Well, good for them. There's an irony, though, that it was Jeremy Hunt's budget that destroyed investment in the North Sea. They've won, and I think what we'll see now is the Conservatives will have their pockets of strength around the country. But in the north of England, the Midlands, South Wales, many other areas, the Conservative vote now averages in by-election after by-election around about 2%. So Reform still is the big national party on the centre-right. A disappointing morning, but we keep going.
It is telling in a way that he's not doing interviews. That does make him seem sort of weaker than he has done. He hasn't normally seemed someone who's sort of afraid of being challenged. I think that does seem to be more the case now. Watching that, what I found interesting was, is there a contradiction there? Because he ends the video by saying, we are the mainstream centre-right party in this country. Yeah. Basically trying to get sort of Tory, because it seems like there were even some Tory voters who voted Andy Burnham in this by-election because they wanted to keep Reform out. I
met some.
You met? Brilliant. So on one side he's saying, I want you guys to see us as the mainstream centre-right party. On the other side he's saying, you guys who voted Restore, we're the party for you. What are you doing? And that's a difficult position to find yourself in.
Yeah. I met Peter the Butcher, who's in that documentary made, and he was such a good person to talk to. LBC found him. He was a Tory voter, voted for Brexit, but he said, I'll always vote for Andy Burnham. And obviously, historically, that's meant the Greater Manchester mayor. And in this instance, it meant voting for him in the by-election. There was a comment earlier on as well on this point saying that Andy Burnham's not famous. It's just we're talking about it because we're political people and we think this, but it's actually not true. In that part of the world, he genuinely is famous. When I was talking to a Green activist who was at the count, I asked him a few hours actually before the end of voting, about 8 o'clock. I said, how do you guys think you're doing? And of course, the Greens said pretty poorly because lots of tactical voting towards Burnham. And he said, he had a great line, as I told you last night. Everybody in Makerfield has an Andy Burnham story. He's been in politics in this part of the world for 25, 26 years. That's lots of conversations. That's lots of casework. That's lots of money here and there, helping this person, having a word with this person. Maybe there's a councillor who's aligned with Burnham who got somebody the planning application or got the drinks license. That's local politics 101, right? And he is very well known in that part of the world. He is, dare I say, famous. The point about the centre-right, if you look at Gorton and Denton, it was actually an inflection moment for Reform for a bunch of reasons. One of them was, going back to what you said a few minutes ago, until Gorton and Denton, the number one party in terms of who you would want to vote against, who would you want to stop, was Labour, right? But the Matt Goodwin tour in Gorton and Denton, that campaign made them so unpopular, it was the jumping off point to make them so unpopular, that actually Reform overtook Labour. And you can really see it. I think February, March, they just shoot up. I will vote in whatever way to stop Reform. That's a recent thing. Until, like I say, February, March, it was Labour. And I think we really saw that in Makerfield. And it's a problem for Reform. It's a real problem for Reform. Alongside that, going to the point he makes about Restore, progressive voters, centre-left voters are more inclined to vote tactically than centre-right voters or right-wing voters. And you see that with Restore coming third. And he's obviously angry with them. Now, that wasn't the difference between Reform winning or losing. Although I think with a better candidate and Restore not standing, they probably get 3,000 or 4,000 behind Burnham. And they're happy with that because they can say we had a great campaign, great numbers, but we just couldn't beat this guy in this seat at this time, which is true, okay? But the reason why Restore are a problem for Reform, Michael, Restore are a problem for Reform, I got that right, didn't I? I love this as well. Restore Britain, Reform UK, goodness me. The reason why they're a problem isn't just because they were stealing votes, because many of the votes that Restore got weren't going to go to Reform anyway. The problem is that Restore, which is only 5 to 10% of the vote, is a significant part of the vote that Reform want to get. And rather than face out the other 90% of the electorate, Reform are having to turn inwards and keep parts of what they thought was their existing coalition. And so in the last 2, 3, 4 weeks of that campaign, they can't get new voters. You know, they want to get more middle-aged women, for instance. They can't get those people. They want to get more young people. They want to get more people that are connected to organised labour and trade unions. They can't get those people. They are still, to a significant extent, a party of over 65s, and particularly a party of older men, okay? They need to break that if they want to win a majority at Westminster. Restore stops that happening because Restore start taking lots of those people. It's a real challenge for Reform. I think it's the biggest challenge for Reform actually going. So even though Restore only get 3,500, whatever it was, and the majority was much bigger, Farage is right to be angry with them. And he's saying, what do you want? I have to laugh, frankly. You know, Restore are doing something that, you know, the radical left couldn't do in terms of screwing Reform. You couldn't wish for a better political platform.
And more people, I think the polling shows as well that more people do associate Reform with racism now than they sort of did in the past.
Yeah.
Because they are leaning so heavily into the white identity politics. Nigel Farage sort of so reluctant to condemn rioting. I think people are starting to see them as a nastier party than they had for a while. Yeah. And then also lots of people just seeing them as a bunch of Tory has-beens.
Yeah.
Like their brand is having a difficult moment.
Can I just say very quickly?
Go on.
Look, the Reform's job is super easy, Michael. We're going to be like the Tories, but we're actually going to have lower migration, a bit more fun, and we're different, we're new. 3 things: lower migration, bit different, bit of charisma. That's it. But like you say, they're having to lean into white nationalism, or maybe not having to, but they think they have to lean into white nationalism and this kind of rhetoric because of Musk and Restore and Rupert Lowe, and it's screwing them. It's really screwing them. Their job is very, very simple. Hegemonize that centre-right space, which is hard when the extreme is now setting the agenda for you.
And also when you've got like just Robert Jenrick, a very unpleasant character. Just lots of people who just seem kind of, because Nigel Farage always seemed like he was having a good time.
Yeah.
Like Robert Jenrick always seems like he's trying to settle a score.
Yeah.
Like he just seems angry and
They've forgotten that,
mean.
man.
And Matt Goodwin's similar as well, actually. They're sort of very bitter, very angry, trying to prove a point. Like it's
I wouldn't even say bitter. I would just say anger. That's true, right?
Mm.
When Farage was, you know, when he won the Brexit referendum in 2016, or when he was part of that campaign, 2 campaigns, obviously, he was a good time guy. He was funny. You know, there were YouTube compilations. You can't barrage the Farage. He was captivating in a way that sort of Trump can be as well. And it's really weird. You have this guy on your side for 15 years and you learn none of those lessons. Okay. As somebody on the left, fine.
Yeah, because he had all the TikToks where he's sort of saying, oh, I won't have soy milk. Like he looked like he could take a joke, and now he just seems like angry all the time. There's also the issue of candidates, and that definitely screwed them a little bit in this election. So in your cortado, Aaron, you mentioned Robert Kenyon being damaged by his performance on Question Time. Let's have a reminder of what actually happened on that show.
I'd rather have a career politician than a plumber who's a sexist.
So you may not all be aware of things that Robert said in the past. You described yourself as sexist.
Allegedly.
You're denying that was a tweet by you?
Some of the things, not...
Okay, you described yourself as a sexist. You have made offensive comments about women. You've admitted that. You've also said that abortion is the cowardly act of women murdering defenseless baby, and that women do it so they can shag anyone they want. That's your phrase, not mine.
I won't accept that label. I mean, a lot of the things have been said 15 years ago. I hold my hands up, I've made mistakes.
It seems like that has, I mean, Aaron, as you'll say that, you heard that on the doorstep as well, that this was making a difference, but the polling also suggested that this had sort of disproportionately put off women from voting for reform or voting for Robert Kenyon. So a pre-election poll from Survation had Kenyon losing with female voters by 53 to 32%. That poll had him ahead with men. Now, in aggregate, the polling here seems to have overestimated support for reform anyway. But I think probably we can take it as still valid that they were struggling more with women than they were with men, even though obviously they were struggling a little bit with both. The choice of Kenyon, though, so you could say, well, they need to get more experienced people. That was what looked like a rational response to the failure of a more high-profile candidate, Matt Goodwin, in Gorton and Denton. Now, as well as a politician and a host at GB News, Goodwin also fashions himself as a political scientist. He has worked as well. He's got a PhD. But he doesn't necessarily have the highest standards of rigor. Last night's result in Makerfield proved his predictions aren't always correct.
Andy Burnham is going to lose Makerfield, and he's going to lose it by some way. And the reason that I say that is because I know Makerfield, and I just ran at the Gorton and Denton by-election. Andy Burnham, firstly, is not as popular as Andy Burnham thinks he is. He would not have won Gorton and Denton, and I say that as somebody that knocked on 7,000 doors in Gorton and Denton. Andy Burnham campaigned in Gorton and Denton. I saw him with my own eyes. He campaigned for Angelika Stoya, the British candidate, the lady that was born and raised in Greece, who attacked me for being insufficiently Mancunian. But nonetheless, Andy Burnham was campaigning in Gorton and Denton, and Labour still finished third behind Reform.
Even that bit, like, the Greek, British, like, who... Like, that just comes across as so unpleasant. Like, there's a small minority of people who'll be like, yeah, that's so cool. Yeah, like, you trigger her, man. But, like, everyone else is just like, have some manners. Like, what are you
I suppose
doing?
he would say that, you said I shouldn't be here because I'm not Mancunian, but you're from overseas.
Yeah, but
if you think that people should be able to campaign and stand for office regardless of where they come from, which I think we both agree on that.
But he could have said that in the debate with her.
I know.
But like, that's just a video. Like, no one watching that video knows that context. They're just like, oh, he just, like, oh.
The way he said it as well comes across as just like sniffy and entitled. And when he's saying, I know. There's a few things here, right? I know Makerfield. With that accent, I don't think you do, but let's be honest, okay? It's like, imagine going to the Scottish Highlands talking like me. Look, I know Inverness. Really? I don't think so, mate. He knocks on doors. But look, here's the thing with the right. There's two things with the right. And they're doing very well. Right now, regardless of what we're talking about here, Reform's still the favourites to be the next government. Okay. I don't think they necessarily will have a majority. But right now, if you look at all the factors, the local elections, blah, blah, blah. There's two things with the right which really stand out for me. It's a radical right. They don't often think I could be wrong. And if I am wrong, why? Right? Which I think we do a lot. I think the left maybe does it too much. Well, you do it a lot.
I do it a lot. I think that there are lots of parts on the left that don't do it enough. But that's a different conversation.
I think on Novara Media we do it a lot. I think we're thoughtful. I think it's a good habit.
Yep.
You say, okay,
we do it more than they do on GB News.
If I'm wrong, or the BBC. Oh no, well, that depends on who on the BBC. The Radio 4 is quite good. I have this opinion, but tell me why I'm wrong, and test my hypothesis on this. I think you're the best of the best at that, Michael. Not just in Novara, but in the British media landscape. Okay, you're up there anyway. I very rarely see that on the right. Well, it's true. It's true. I am flattering, but it's also true. I don't really see that very much on the right. Okay, and another thing is, this person disagrees with me. Why do they disagree with me? Because of course that's how you learn how to persuade them, right? Okay, well, what motivates you? They're not curious. And another thing, they very rarely surprise me. When I hear Matt Goodwin or Robert Jenrick or basically any of them, probably with the exception actually of Farage, none of them surprise me, ever, which is a problem because if you're predictable, you're a cliche. And if you're a cliche, that doesn't keep people interested.
Yeah. I don't think it's a left-right thing. I just think it's a personality type. And I think that Reform has got more sort of aggressive, sort of people who sound resentful, who don't sound curious. You know, like I do think that Nigel Farage historically has normally seemed like someone who's up for a debate.
Yeah.
But Matt Goodwin and Robert Jenrick, they often seem like offended by the person who's asked that question.
Yeah.
You know, how dare you ask that question? Don't you know how angry the British people are? It's like, it doesn't make you want to, like, who wants to go for a drink with Robert Jenrick? Let's be real. That was one of the things that Nigel Farage always had going for him. People thought like, oh, he seems like he might be entertaining down the pub. I imagine less and less that seems to be the case now because he's seeming more angry and he's surrounded by all these aggressive people.
Corbyn at his worst, and this is when he was just being attacked relentlessly in 2018, and it changed him as a politician from the guy in 2017 who did terrifically well. That was Corbyn at his worst, right? Almost constantly offended, constantly wounded.
Defensive,
irritable, cantankerous, you know, and sometimes it can be justified. But if you want to win votes, you can't do that.
Who do you think at this point is, I mean, it's a stupid question to ask because it's so big, but sort of the chances of Labour being the biggest party at the next general election have massively gone up over the past 24 hours, haven't they?
Well, look, Burnham needs to become the leader first. That hasn't happened yet.
But that will happen in the next 2 weeks.
Happen.
That's one thing that there is very little uncertainty about.
Yeah. There's a few things with Labour. So first of all, I think it is just a toxic organisation. It's incredibly toxic. And I think the Labour right are some of the most dysfunctional people in British politics. That's not going to change. And I think that will come to the fore in a general election. If Burnham and the people around him, and he has a solid team, and they're sort of ideologically committed to whatever project they have, and they want to see it through, if they can build a cadre, et cetera, that do that, then maybe Labour can do well. But is that, you know, Burnham's theory of change? You know, Burnham's been the mayor of Manchester, but he's never actually had to lead a political party. You know, he's never led a council, for instance.
Well, so he doesn't really seem like someone with a theory of change, does he?
No, and you know, it's a tough one. I don't know. But then, you know, you have something like Mark Carney. He didn't have to do all of that. You know, he just basically had good vibes, good policies, right timing, and completely capsized Canadian politics.
I mean, the big difference between Mark Carney and Andy Burnham is that Mark Carney is someone who had a deep understanding of economics. Like he was the technocrat, right? Because he had been the governor of the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England, and then sort of he knew what he was. Whereas I suppose the fear with Andy Burnham is because he's not really a policy guy. Will sort of he flip-flop? Will people be able to run rings around him? And he get pulled in different directions? Because I suppose I like people who are sort of ideologically flexible and sort of willing to be questioned. But if you are someone who defers, who you say sort of like, to be honest, I'm not the economics guy. So I'm very persuaded by what you're saying. But then someone over there tells you a different thing. And you're like, oh, God, now both of you sound persuasive. I've got no idea what I'm going to do. And if economics is the key issue on which you're going to get judged on, that's difficult. So I worry that he gets into Downing Street, he gets pulled in all of these different directions. He's sort of like, I kind of just like being the charming guy that people like, and I can do moral leadership, but policy on a national level, I'm a little bit out of my depth. And unless you've got a really sort of coherent number two, sort of like Corbyn with McDonnell or something like that. I mean, I suppose what Ed Miliband wants is for Andy Burnham to be the sort of moral leadership figurehead.
Yeah, and look at Blair, right?
And for him to do but even Blair, I think, Blair definitely had a philosophy of government in a way that Andy Burnham doesn't.
And he was also a lawyer, so he was very interested in building coherent arguments, which were logically, you know, premised, and you know, you couldn't break down the argument.
I don't think you could run rings around Tony Blair.
No,
and I feel like you maybe can run rings around Andy Burnham.
Yeah, but I think maybe Burnham is probably willing to outsource. Not that Blair wanted to outsource it to Brown, but in the end, that's sort of what happened. You know, Burnham might just outsource lots of his economic thinking to a chancellor, and that's just the kind of leadership we have. You know, a bit like Cameron with George Osborne, right? Cameron was the prime minister, but the real architect of austerity, 2010 to 2015, was George Osborne. I don't think he's as vacuous as you're sort of suggesting. Maybe you think that, I don't know. I do think there's some substance to him, just because he's been in politics so long. And there's a hinterland that he can draw on, whether it's metaphors or achievements. So I don't think he just like collapse on impact with power. But I agree with you. I think in a crisis, I can see him making bad calls, right? Because he doesn't have that sort of ideological core, which in a crisis really, really matters. You know, every time there's a foreign conflict somewhere, Jeremy Corbyn knows what he thinks straight away. And actually, a lot of the time, he's right. Because he doesn't sort of get distracted from this or that point. Well, this has happened over there. Well, okay, but I remember the same thing being said in 1973 in Chile, and look how that turned out, right? So, yeah, I mean, it does matter, but how many politicians these days have that kind of hinterland. And also on Carney. It's easy to say Carney was the technocrat, but we're meant to be in this populist age where people don't like technocrats, right? People were allergic to people like Carney. So I think people like Carney because he came across as competent, but you can be competent in a panoply of ways. I think people associate, for now, Burnham with competence because he was the mayor of Manchester, and Manchester seems to be doing okay. Manchester is building stuff and it's got buses. I don't think everything's great in Manchester, but from the outside, it looks like a success story in an otherwise kind of failing country over the last 20 years. So I think that's going to be huge. Who does Burnham choose to lead on the economics of this stuff? Because if he does this whole team of rivals, broad tent, that's what I think would collapse him. Because I think you're right. The personality type, that lack of an ideological core, and then the flakiness of, well, my Home Secretary thinks this, my Foreign Secretary thinks this, my Chancellor thinks this, the whole thing's going to combust.
And also, if you want to be liked, then you're sort of like, well, all these people are moaning me about this, and then all these people are moaning me about this, and then, what can I do to sort of... I think that if you don't have policy chops and you want to be liked, it is hard to sort of have a grounding. I mean, Boris Johnson was a bit like that, really, wasn't he? So he didn't really care about policy. He wanted people to like him, and that's why Dominic Cummings calls him the trolley, right? Because he's depends on who he's listened to last, depends on who's hassling him. Yeah. The kind of person who you can sway them by hassling them, by sort of asking them over and over again, and then they go, okay, sure. I don't really know anyway, so I might as well just make my life easier by agreeing with you instead of that person. Yeah.
Strategy, it's all that everybody talks about all the time. People on LinkedIn get paid loads of money to say strategy, strategy, strategy. What does it mean? Strategy often can be reduced to a single word. No, we're not doing that. It's not about what you do. It's about what you don't do. It's about what you're foreclosing. And strategy is the complete opposite of wanting to be liked. If you want to be liked, you can't strategize because strategy is actually pissing people off a lot of the time. Sorry, we're not going to do that. I want to work on this project. No, you can't because it deviates from this objective we have. These are the guiding principles. These are the resources. This is the problem we're trying to solve. This is what we've agreed to do to get there. That is a distraction. And there are distractions all the time. And good strategy is about discarding the distractions. If you want to be liked, you can't be good at strategy. If you want to know more about that, read Richard Rummelt, Good Strategy, Bad Strategy. By the way, recommended by Dominic Cummings. Very good book. And I think we haven't had many people who care about strategy and politics in this country. I mean, Cummings was one of them, right?
Well, the other thing is that if you identify too much as a strategist, so Cummings and then I think Morgan McSweeney sort of saw himself in that light as well. If you think to have strategy means to piss people off, and then you end up just pissing so many people off that you can't pursue your strategy, which is what both of them did.
McSweeney's one was just piss off everybody, right? Which is obviously crazy.
Because it wasn't even clear what he was trying to achieve.
Well, I mean, settle the scores with the left from bloody Lambeth or whatever. But I mean, that's an important point, isn't it? McSweeney, and that's how Starmer, this is how Labour got in this mess. Because for the first year of the government, when everybody was saying, you're really screwing up here all the time. It's like, no, you ignore the noise. Ignore the noise, focus on the long game. And actually, it's just got worse and worse and worse and worse. Before you know it, you're losing a by-election and the Greens win with a majority of 4,500, you come third. That's what happens when ignore the noise. You're just going deeper into quicksand. You don't want to do that either, of course. But that key point, which I said earlier, is if you want to be liked, you can't do strategy. 100% true. Whether it's a business, whether it's politics, anything. Sometimes you're going to piss people off, including yourself, because you've got the objective.
Do you think, I suppose you're pushing back, I think, Andy, but I'm very pleased he has won this by-election. I'm really pleased he's going to become Prime Minister. I wish him all the best. Like, I think that his leadership being a success is the best chance we have for politics to not go completely down the drain in this country. But I do think he's superficial, especially when it comes to policy. And I feel like maybe you were pushing back a bit and you think that actually maybe there's something of a bit more substance to him.
Well, look, you can be superficial and still do well.
You could also be superficial and like a nice guy. I think he's a nice guy.
Yeah, but I mean, you can be superficial and do well. The question is, can Labour do well? Let's say Labour right now are on 20%, okay? Can they get to 30% with Burnham being moderately superficial? I mean, maybe. There's lots of people say, and I'm one of them. Look, I'm a Marxist, right? Maybe if you're watching or listening, you didn't know that. I don't want to upset you, I'm a Marxist, so of course I like looking at things structurally. I'll be the first to say, Labour has structural problems, Andy Burnham can't sort them all out. British capitalism is in crisis, it can't reproduce its middle class, that's why there's no Conservative Party, all these big, long words. Okay, you can do all of that. Andy Burnham turns up, long eyelashes, Harrington jacket, let's stop HMOs. Let's spend $1 billion with fly tipping.
He actually mentioned HMOs in his speech today.
Yeah, let's get more British transport, please. 3 or 4 things which literally the voters you need really care about, okay? Starmer had almost an aversion to doing that. It was just bizarre. That we're going to spend $6 billion on Pride in Place. $6 billion. It's a lot of money. And it was for stuff that they're not going to vote. These are the people who are literally turning to reform. So very low income, white, low middle class people outside of major cities, we know, particularly if they're older, are going to reform, right? And Pride in Place was just the ROI, the return on investment from a political perspective was terrible. $6 billion is a lot of money, right?
And what were they spending it on? This was like shop fronts and stuff, or what was the money going on?
So Pride in Place is $6 billion is going to be spent on, I think, several hundred places, ultimately 600 or 700 places. And it's a tiny part of a local area will get awarded £20 million. Okay? So where I live in Portsmouth, 2 places are getting it. In Bournemouth, 3 places are getting it. These aren't like a ward. It's a tiny part of one ward. So one of the places in Portsmouth that's getting it is, I think, 5,000 people. 5,000 people is getting £20 million. That's £4,000 a head. You can buy a lot of votes if you're spending that kind of money, right? But the way it's being done is we're going to appoint a board, and they've got until November to generate ideas. And it was only 4 months, and it'll be about the priorities of the local community. It's like, no, you're the government. You've got a mandate. Do stuff.
Well, also,
so they were really focusing on like democratic process and inclusion and community. It sounds great, but that's going to take 2 years before you get any results. You're polling in the pits right now. If you're going to spend $6 billion in terms of, okay, how do I build my coalition back again? This doesn't seem very sensible to me. You know, on the other hand, I'm not a fan of Starlink. I don't know if you saw it recently. You know, Heidi Alexander, the Transport Secretary, is saying, we will now make sure that there's working Wi-Fi on all trains in this country. And they're saying it's going to cost £65 million. You're thinking, what on earth didn't that happen sooner? That's such a crazy thing. That's a contact point with the British state, right? You have all these contact points with the state. Some work, many don't, okay? One of them is you go on the train, which is really expensive, and the internet doesn't work. If that was something you changed in 3 or 6 months, people realize that really quickly. Or passports. Yeah, okay, that passport, it was costing you £100. It's going to be £20. All the people renewing their passport think, wow, okay, the state isn't always trying to screw me over. Wow. Just change those contact points. Try and do as many as you can for as little as you can. But they weren't thinking like that. It was very, very strange. Starmer and McSweeney were not detailed people.
I think actually, you know, in terms of just do it from the centre, I think you're right that he needs to do some quick things from the centre to make people sort of like change their mind about politics in the Labour Party.
But also fix the country.
But that's where I because I think to fix the country, actually, it has to be way more long-term, and it's not going to give you immediate political gains. And the one thing that Andy Burnham potentially does actually believe in, and is less superficial, is devolution. Sort of like lots of the people around him are sort of saying, he does seem actually keen on that. And I think you do actually have to hand a lot of power out of Westminster so that local authorities can raise their own money, or city authorities. You probably want these sort of metro mail type regions. They can raise more money. They can compete with each other. They can try and attract investment, attract people, build more. Like, there is a very strong argument, I think, that one of the reasons why Britain is so regionally unequal compared to much of Europe and even the United States is because everything happens from the Treasury. And I do think that is something he probably does believe in and will do.
So you're sort of discarding policy chops, and you're saying that emotions aren't everything. So let me take it from the other angle, right? We've got local government reorganisation in this country, English devolution bill, massive shifts in terms of local government, right? In Hampshire, I think they're going to create 3 new authorities for ultimately these are going to be mayoralties, okay? So you're going to have, I think, East Hampshire or Southeast Hampshire and Southwest Hampshire. So basically Greater Southampton, Greater Portsmouth, and Winchester with all the rural bits, okay? And for the mayor, it's going to be the mayor of East Hampshire. The mayor of East Hampshire. Portsmouth as a city is, well, as a city, it's only a century old, but as a place with a cathedral and whatnot, 900 years old. Southampton is 900 years old. You know, Portsmouth's motto is literally from the Crusades. It's the crescent and the star. You're going to create a mayor. It's got to have the word Portsmouth in it. It's about history. It's about place. And Burnham gets that. But, it's the mayor for East Hampshire. Nobody cares about that role, right? Or Southampton. People really care about this stuff. I know some people think I take this too far sometimes, but it literally costs you nothing.
So do you think it should be the mayor of Greater Portsmouth?
Yeah.
Or the mayor of Greater Southampton?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just giving you one example, right? Or the Winchester metro region, where people call the mayor of Winchester, Greater Winchester. You know, little things like that. I mean, at one point, they were talking about having a mayor for Portsmouth, Southampton, and Bournemouth. One mayor. And anybody that's familiar with the South Coast knows these are three completely different places. To a large extent, they all hate each other. Not really Bournemouth, because we're quite nice in Bournemouth. But Portsmouth and Southampton hate each other, right? You'd be crazy to put them all into one big authority, and it's just a huge bit of land. So if I'm a mayor and I'm really popular in a bit of Pompey, you know, nobody in Portsmouth, in Southampton or Bournemouth is going to know me. You know, what's your connection to these voters? Things like this.
So the technocratic argument for doing it that way, and I take your point, is to say that what you need to have for development is agglomeration. So you need, it's not just small towns that are going to sort of create development.
Yeah.
It is having these authorities which can combine sort of significant urban areas that you can afford to have sort of proper transport investment, because no town on its own is going to be able to do it. But you're saying that even though that's what the economic experts might suggest, politically it doesn't work.
Well,
and that's why you need the emotional sort of the emotional connection with people.
It's a balance, okay? So I agree with you. You want agglomeration effects. You want this to be efficient and effective policy making, but people don't want to live in economic zones. They want to live in places, right, which they care about. And also, these were already quite big places. So Bournemouth, Christchurch, Poole, BCP, it's combined authority, is about 500,000 people. So you've got 500,000 people there. I think for this authority of Bournemouth, Poole, Christchurch, Southampton, Portsmouth, it's about 2 million people. You know, that's not a mayor, Michael, right? It's like...
Well, we've got a mayor of London. We've got 8 million people.
No, I know, but in terms of a city mayor, by Southern English standards, basically it's like a governor of a state, okay? And the reason why they were doing this was because there was one paper, I think by KPMG it's PricewaterhouseCoopers, and they said, this is the perfect size for these agglomeration effects, blah, blah. And by the way, who's doing all the integration of the back end and the human resources and the finance, and the accounting and the hiring and the firing and the networking and the IT? PricewaterhouseCoopers. They're getting all the contracts, and they're the ones that said, you have to have this size. And it's a bit of a conflict of interest there as well. It's a balancing act. And I do think that Andy Burnham is better than Keir Starmer at that kind of balancing act. Okay, we want to get advantages here, right? Good policy. But people also have to care about it and be emotionally invested in it. If you don't have one without the other, then it literally won't work, because we're a democracy. And people will go vote for another party that literally gets rid of that stuff, you know? So I do think Burnham's going to be better than Starmer.
Oh, I think Burnham's going to be better than Starmer.
But I'm saying in implementing what you're taking as technocratic policy, I think that the sheen and veneer of Burnham is a much better way of delivering it. Nobody wants to live in, you know, the greater East Hampshire region. Nobody wants to live there. People want to live in, you know, Southampton because they were born there, or their wife's there, or they work in the docks, or their dad works in the docks, or in Pompey, their dad was in the Navy.
I mean, it's as you say, it's 900 years old, it's got a football team, makes sense.
Yeah.
I agree. I think that's a good point.
Place matters.